What if you went to jail and vanished? No trial, no goodbyes, no contact with the outside world. In China, it's not fiction, it's reality. Death row inmates disappear, condemned and executed without warning. Families are left in the dark, sometimes without even a body. From covert killings to reports of organ harvesting, the truth is darker than anyone imagines. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're revealing the insane things China does to death row inmates. In November 2008, the daughters of a 59-year-old man had been desperately trying to get information about their father, Wo Weihan, a scientist arrested 3 years earlier. His family had almost no idea what had happened to him. One day he was living his quiet life in Austria, the next he was gone. In a closed trial with no family allowed to attend, Wo was convicted of passing state secrets to Taiwan. Prosecutors say that while working in Germany, Wo was bribed to leak technical details about China's strategic missile program after being recruited by Taiwan's Military Intelligence Bureau. The evidence was strong. He was no doubt guilty, but his family received hardly any information about what had taken place during his months-long interrogation or later at his trial. It was an exceptional case given the national security stakes, but even so, it's as if he had vanished into a black hole. No one ever found out what had transpired. When he was executed by firing squad in November 2008, his family wasn't even notified, so saying goodbye was off the table. They only learned afterward that it had happened. "Our hearts are bleeding," one of his daughters said, calling the execution a degradation of humanity. That's the thing in China. Anything can happen behind closed doors. You can be tortured or poorly represented, and it might happen in silence. It's no wonder Chinese prosecutors have a 99% conviction rate in criminal trials. It's you against the system, and the system almost always wins. And according to experts in the West, you might even have your organs harvested. But by the time your family finds out you're dead, you're just a handful of ashes sitting in a tin. No one even knows how many people are executed every year in China. The figure remains a state secret. In 2023, Amnesty International's global report listed Iran at the top with more than 850 confirmed executions, followed by Saudi Arabia, 172, Somalia at 38, and the United States at 24. But those are confirmed numbers. Afghanistan, North Korea, Syria, Vietnam, and especially China refuse to share data. Amnesty believes China may execute more people than the rest of the world combined. In 2024, confirmed executions worldwide topped 1,500, a bumper year for state-sanctioned killing. But with China and several other countries keeping their figures secret, the real number is believed to be much higher. It's the same story with death sentences. China is estimated to issue thousands each year, far outpacing the usual suspects like Egypt, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Amnesty says about 40% of confirmed global executions in 2024 were for drug-related crimes. It's believed many in China met the same fate. But as always, the details are hidden behind the curtain of the state. In China, people are often arrested on vague charges, accused of threatening national security or disturbing public order, and many are charged with subversion of state power, inciting subversion, or the catch-all crime of picking quarrels and provoking trouble, or worse, collusion with foreign forces. Human rights groups say Chinese citizens can be detained arbitrarily. They can simply vanish, one day at home, the next inside a detention center no one can locate. What happens after that often begins with a confession. China's criminal justice system is still heavily reliant on forced confessions. Things changed slightly in 2010 when the country introduced rules on the exclusion of illegally obtained evidence in criminal cases. There were more updates in later years and a promise to give people judicial professionalism, but the implementation of those rules has remained inconsistent. Experts inside of China estimate that only around 20% of defendants ever receive legal representation. That means countless men and women are taken from their homes in the middle of the night, left at the mercy of police under intense pressure to extract a confession. In much of Asia, signing a confession is as good as a conviction. And in China, that document is often signed after hours or days of torment without a lawyer anywhere in sight. Survivors describe being forced to stand in stress positions, hooded and beaten with truncheons, deprived of sleep, food, and water. Some are hung by their wrists, others strapped to the tiger bench, a notorious torture device where a prisoner's legs are bound to a wooden bench while bricks are slid underneath their feet until their knees bend backward. Chinese law explicitly forbids this, but activists say local police in various provinces often operate with unchecked authority. A system like this can breed corruption. If everyone knows you can be accused of crime and convicted without evidence, it gives police leverage. They can extract bribes or at least close a case under pressure. That's why in most highly developed countries, a confession by itself, without solid evidence, isn't worth the paper it's written on. One of China's most infamous examples was Zhao Zhouhai, a poor villager from Henan province. Accused of murdering and beheading a neighbor, Zhao was tortured until he confessed. 11 years later, the alleged victim walked back into the village, very much with his head intact. Zhao was exonerated, but only after spending more than a decade on death row, where his case was doomed thanks to his confession under duress. The case caused national outrage. Chinese citizens and media blasted a justice system they already knew was broken, and interrogation culture that they said was both outdated and cruel. In response, the government promised reforms and introduced anti-torture mechanisms. But lawyers say that in rural or less developed provinces, not much has changed. It's often a case of the poorer the suspect, the harsher the treatment. For ethnic minorities, it's often much harder to fight the system when there has been wrongdoing. Those accused of vaguely defined national security crimes may be placed under residential surveillance at a designated location, or RSDL, a legal euphemism for secret detention. Human rights organizations estimate that tens of thousands of people are currently held under RSDL or similar forms of detention, where they risk abuse, beatings, starvation, isolation, and forced confessions. Some are later transferred to psychiatric hospitals, even though they are very much sane, or they're packed off to so-called black jails, unofficial facilities where detainees can languish for months before formal charges are brought. But perhaps the most horrifying fate of all is what sometimes happens to prisoners once they vanish. They are subjected to blood tests, x-rays, and ultrasound exams, and these aren't health checks, they are compatibility tests. The state is assessing whether their organs are suitable for transplant in an industry currently worth over $1 billion in China. Victims of what's called forced organ harvesting have included Uyghurs, Tibetans, Muslims, and practitioners of Falun Gong, a banned spiritual movement. UN experts have said surgeons, anesthetists, and other medical staff are enlisted to remove organs from prisoners, often before their families are told of their executions. Death row in such cases becomes an operating theater, like something out of a Hollywood horror movie. It sounds unbelievable, but the demand for organs in China is vast, while the official donor pool is a puddle. For reasons that aren't entirely clear, people in China rarely carry donor cards. One study found that Chinese and Korean communities, even in the US, are often hesitant to donate organs, partly because of distrust in the system and fears their organs could end up on the black market, and partly because of beliefs about life after death. When people in China were asked on Reddit why organ donation isn't common, one user said the body is seen as sacred, something not to be disturbed after death, or it might mess with the cosmic cycle of rebirth. He also pointed to a lack of education about organ donation in some of China's provinces. Another person, this one from Henan, wrote that dissecting the remains causes psychological discomfort to relatives. Whatever the case, statistically, many Chinese people are just not big on lending out parts of their body after they die. Yet China has this very large organ donation industry. It's a fact that until 2015, it was actually legal to harvest organs from executed prisoners in China. The rationale was they committed a crime, they may as well be useful and help someone live. But the law changed that year, requiring donations to be voluntary. Still, that's the issue. There seems to be more organs being transplanted than people donating. So the evidence suggests the practice has continued behind the smokescreen of progress. In 2021, an independent international tribunal in London accused the Chinese government of committing crimes against humanity. They concluded that forced organ harvesting was still taking place on a significant scale. The tribunal called the practice unmatched wickedness, one of the worst mass atrocities of the century. After hearing from witnesses, the panel said it could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that China's government carried out murder, torture, disappearances, and even harvested organs from living detainees. The findings set off a firestorm. Around the same time, the U.S. introduced legislation aimed at blocking the importation of organs and medical products connected to China's transplant system. The concern was that some of those organs, kidneys, livers, even corneas, were entering the international market through intermediaries and sometimes ending up in the U.S. In the shadowy world of global organ trafficking, it isn't always easy to trace the original source. Very few victims ever survive organ harvesting to tell their story. But in 2020, a man from a rural village in Shandong province, identified only as Mr. Cheng Pai-ming, made it to the other side, albeit with missing parts. Cheng was a practitioner of Falun Gong, the spiritual movement banned in Beijing in 1999. Why the state would target people for meditating, exercising, and speaking about morality isn't entirely clear. Officials have called Falun Gong a dangerous cult, but to many observers, it was simply a movement that grew too large, too independent, and too outside of party control. For his beliefs, Cheng said he was arrested repeatedly between 1999 and 2004, each time detained arbitrarily and tortured. In 2002, he was sent to Daqing prison in Heilongjiang province, where he says he was beaten, strapped down, and subjected to a series of medical tests, blood draws, chest scans, ultrasounds, the kind of exams used to assess organ compatibility. Later, he was stretched on a kind of rack until he lost consciousness. When he awoke, he was chained to a hospital bed, a searing pain in his chest and side, tubes protruding from his body. He had no idea what had been done to him. Sent back to prison in agony, he was eventually transferred to another hospital. He later managed to escape, eventually fleeing to Thailand and then to the US. Only then did he learn what had really happened. Chinese surgeons had removed parts of his liver and lungs. Estimates suggest that as many as 100,000 Chinese prisoners may be victims of organ harvesting each year, but verifying numbers is pretty much impossible. As we said, victims are often cut off from lawyers and family. One day, their relatives are told that they are dead, the body already turned to ashes. But the secrecy doesn't end there. In recent years, several foreign citizens have also been executed in China with little to no transparency. Just last year, 4 Canadians, all dual nationals, were reportedly executed for drug-related crimes. Their names were never publicly released. What would be front-page news anywhere else barely registered in China. There was no footage of their trials, no official statement, no final appeals, no tearful protests of innocence to be turned into Netflix documentaries. They simply vanished from the record. Even the method of execution isn't known, though it was likely to be lethal injection. The prisoners themselves are not usually given a date. They know they'll be executed, but they don't know when. Each and every day they sit in their cell not knowing if the footsteps they hear are the men who are coming to take them away. It's a kind of torture not being able to make your peace with the world. Still, in some cases, prisoners can be executed just 7 days after sentencing. So it's not as though they have much time to think about it. But why are so many people executed in China? The country has said it takes a zero-tolerance stance on drugs, not counting alcohol and tobacco, 2 drugs that account for over $600 billion of the Chinese economy. In 2024, the Chinese government said the drug problem is getting worse around the world, so it's cracking down hard. Streets in the USA and the UK, where seemingly hopeless men and women, trained to become deaths of despair, are a major source of anti-West propaganda in China. China's National Narcotics Control Commission reported in 2024 that there were roughly 747,000 registered drug users, a slight drop from the year before. That same year, authorities made 62,000 arrests and seized 26.7 tons of drugs, most of it flowing in from the Golden Triangle, especially Myanmar. Myanmar is one of the world's biggest sources of heroin and synthetic drugs, especially in Shan State, where armed militias and Chinese crime syndicates churn out meth and fentanyl precursors beyond the reach of the central government. In 2024, the New York Times called Myanmar the world's crime capital, blaming Chinese syndicates and local warlords alike. The CCP hates drugs. Trafficking is almost always a death sentence. In 2009, Liu Xiaohua, a chemistry student, China's Breaking Bad, was executed after earning an estimated $5.5 billion manufacturing methamphetamine. He'd studied under a university professor to perfect his recipe for the best ice around. The West once got China hooked on opium, he reportedly told the court, so selling meth to the West was payback. Then they executed him. Even small-scale smuggling can carry a major risk. In 2015, Juliana Lopez Sarazola, a Colombian model and TV presenter, was caught in Guangzhou with cocaine hidden in a laptop. She faced the death penalty but got away with just 15 years, incredibly lenient by Chinese standards. Even possession of a small amount of narcotics can be a capital offense. Over the past 2 decades, China has executed at least 1 British national, 3 South Koreans, and several Indonesians and Filipinos, all for drug trafficking. As of 2025, 6 Japanese men remain on death row for the same charge. If they were Chinese citizens, they'd have been gone in a flash. When it's foreigners, there's usually more transparency, but not much. China's black hole of justice is very deep. The case of Robert Schellenberg, a Canadian accused of smuggling almost 500 pounds of methamphetamine, is an outlier. Initially sentenced to 15 years, he appealed. He was resentenced to death. Many observers saw the timing as retaliation for Canada's arrest of Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive detained in Vancouver on a U.S. extradition request. Schellenberg now waits in his cell, uncertain when or how he'll be executed. We know he says he was framed, but we don't know about his conditions in prison. He's in that black hole. The irony is that corruption runs through every layer of China's so-called war on drugs. According to the Brookings Institution, drug money routinely flows through local officials, customs officers, and police. Some accept bribes, others profit from protection rackets. Every time an official is executed for such corruption, another soon takes his place. There's just too much money in drugs for some officials not to get involved. And the problem doesn't end with drugs. China has become the epicenter of another criminal boom, one that affects millions of people in Asia and beyond. Scam centers. Many of these are based in Myanmar's borderlands and Cambodia's casino zones, where Chinese and local gangs run scams, online gambling, cyber fraud, and narcotics operations under one roof. The UN now calls this a scamdemic. China says it's cracking down, but when there is so much money at stake, it's hard to gain control. Nonetheless, in 2024, Chinese police announced the arrest of 39 members of the Ming crime family, whose scam and drug empire near the Myanmar border was worth an estimated $1.4 billion. 11 of them were sentenced to death. China has promised to crack down more, but corruption again makes it difficult. In many provinces where the centers call home, local officials can earn more in bribes than they would in a lifetime of salary. The cycle keeps repeating: raids, arrests, a few televised executions, then it's business as usual again. So drug trafficking and being a part of a major organized crime syndicate is one way to end up on China's death row. Along with murder, they are the main reasons to be killed by the state, with a few officials occasionally being executed for crimes such as bribery and trading state secrets. Before the 2006 legal reforms, China had 68 crimes punishable by death. That number was reduced to 46 after 2015, when offenses like counterfeiting, smuggling weapons, or even spreading rumors and undermining morale during wartime were struck off. No one outside of a small circle of officials will ever know when an execution in China is taking place. The exact locations are state secrets. Sometimes an execution ground is selected, a remote site with 3 layers of security, a firing team in the middle, police forming the inner perimeter, and soldiers guarding the outer fence. In the past, firing squads were standard, but the process was messy. About 15 years ago, the government introduced what it called a more civilized system, the mobile execution van. These white vans, equipped with restraints and an intravenous drug setup, can drive from province to province. Inside, the condemned are injected with a 3-drug lethal cocktail. Within minutes, it's over. The bodies are taken away for cremation, and families are notified only afterward. Today, it's not even known if the vans are still used. That is how secret Chinese executions are. If crimes make the headlines, it's often because that's what the government demands. In 2024, 3 executions drew national attention. One involved a star student who bludgeoned his mother to death with a dumbbell, wrapped her body in plastic, and used her savings to go traveling. That same year, a 62-year-old man was executed for driving his car through a crowd leaving a stadium, killing 35 and injuring dozens more, many of them children. Furious over a divorce settlement, he turned his anger onto strangers. Then in early 2025, the state executed a 21-year-old man who had stabbed 8 classmates to death and injured 17 others outside a vocational art school. He had failed his exams and had been offered what he called an insulting internship wage. In the last 2 cases, the time from conviction to death was just months. As you've seen already, in China, unlike in the US, there is no endless cycle of retrials and clemency petitions. The death sentence is cheap. But not all cases like we just mentioned are so clear and simple. The government often censors discussion about murders to prevent public panic and maintain the image of social harmony. Yet online, young people have coined a phrase, "taking revenge on society," to describe a new wave of nihilistic crimes committed by disaffected citizens. In a collectivist culture where national identity is tied to social success, failure can feel like betrayal by the state. But it's crimes like these that keep the death penalty popular in China. Surveys suggest that around 60% of citizens still support capital punishment, down from the 80 to 95% approval rates recorded in the 1990s. While the execution remains hidden in China, the judgment itself is often public, staged like grim theater. On sentencing day, local governments might invite students, teachers, and residents to watch as the condemned are paraded before a crowd. In some provinces, these sentencing rallies are still held in stadiums or public squares, reminiscent of Mao-era spectacles meant to instill fear and obedience. When Liu Yong, a mafia kingpin from Liaoning, was sentenced to death in 2001, thousands packed into the stands to watch. He confessed to his crimes, although reports later claimed he had been tortured. When high-ranking officials are convicted of corruption, they are also sometimes let out by soldiers in front of packed auditoriums. The message on local television is crime does not pay. These public rituals serve two purposes. They reinforce the message that order will be maintained at any cost, and they remind ordinary citizens that the machinery of power will get you in the end. In China, the death penalty is a performance, but don't expect to see what goes on backstage. China's death row practices are shocking, but what if the execution itself goes horribly wrong? Find out what happens when death row execution fails, or click on this video instead.